Hi, everyone. This is the Think Big session for the Ops section. And today's topic is environments. Uh, environments is a topic that has, at least for me, previously been somewhat confusing because at GitLab, we often use the word environment and specifically deployment interchangeably. And we have several pages that's related to environment. We have the environment dashboard. We have a environments page, and within environments, there's also deployments. And I figured this would be a great topic to talk about and to try to collectively get everyone's thoughts on what environments could possibly be for our customers. And some of the outcomes I'm specifically looking forward to today is to get a good understanding of what environments at GitLab today is all about. And then also, sorry, my headphones tell me I'm out of battery. Also, that what environments could potentially become going forward. And so with that, I'd love to kick it off to the entire group. Let's first talk about what environment is today at GitLab. I'm gonna pick a person to get us started. The first person I see is Hayana, but I won't pick on her because she's helping us take notes. So I'm gonna pick Kenny.
Yeah, so what they are today, I think that we rightfully, if I think about it, there's a little bit of like we built environments based on the way that our product evolved, and our product evolved from being a CI/CD tool or CI tool that became useful for CI/CD. So we've kind of built the constructs for how to think about environments into that deployment process itself as defined in your CI YAML. So they're like the representation, lots of the representation of the environment is you define it as part of a job, a specific deployment job. And that has huge benefits because it gave developers immediate control for being able to create deployments and environments on their own in their specific project. What else? So, and then we represent those environments in various places, whether that's in the environments page where we surface different types of environments, including production or staging or ephemeral environments. And then we even like with our Kubernetes integration extend that to show what's going on with that environment, whether that's like clickouts to the metrics, or you can look into the logs. I think at some point we also had the you can kubectl into that namespace on your Kubernetes cluster. You can see how the pods are deploying. And in my mind, that view of like, here's an environment, I can understand what's going on with it, I can look at the environment, is super useful, but it's the how we got to creating that and how users think about how do I start an environment or create an environment in the right org structure that is the limiting factor today.
Cool, thanks, Kenny. Yeah. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I would just add a minor detail to this. I totally agree with everything that Kenny said. Then that detail is that I think that environments should be really central to GitLab, because if I think about the vision that GitLab has, then I would expect that a project homepage, for example, shows me the most recent releases that were deployed into all the different environments, be they SLIs and SLOs. And this is just not possible if we don't consider environments to be a very central piece. And it might be possible to hack this today even together, because we have a level of integration with Prometheus and we have the notion of environment, and those can be tied to CI jobs. But actually it's just the whole concept of environments are not there to really say that this is what would be the place of the environments. So that's why I think we have to discuss this topic.
And another thing that I'd like to add is that when Jackie and I did research for the now defunct release management team, we learned that people don't really know what environments are about. Like even when you call environments with GitLab, right? It's this construct, as Kenny said, that it's so related to deployments, that because you don't really have that centralized place and you don't think of your deployments, your environments as an application, you don't have that group high level view. People are very confused, or we're not deploying because they don't know how things connect and where to find, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are also a finding from our research.
And I was going to follow up based on what Hannah said. Can you talk a bit more about what you learned, like what prevented people from deploying because the environment's concept was confusing?
So there were different issues. So for example, of course, we can talk about the findability, right? Or when you are in the context of a merge request, for example, you only look at that specific deployment or environment. But mostly what we learn is that for customers that they, I don't know, they have multiple groups or hundreds of projects within a group, they really want the ability to share environment at the higher level. And our research was mostly related to releases and how we could facilitate global releases and deployments of the application. And we wanted to support environments at the group level. So that was, I think that was the biggest learning for us. And it started relating to bigger things, for example, the DORA for metrics, right? And getting all the data, getting everything connected in one place so we could start talking about enterprise management. But people had that desire to manage their applications and not one isolated deployment for that one specific target branch. They want to look at everything that is in production that goes to a higher level. And because they don't know how to do that with GitLab, they just don't use environments and they don't deploy with GitLab. Of course, there's more to it. So I'm going to add here, there's a recording of Jackie explaining the opportunity canvas. But that was the next big thing for us in release management. That was supposed to be environments and deployments at the group level.
Kevin, would it be helpful to, I don't know if everyone here is like as intimately familiar with this as Ayana is, but would it be helpful to show what we have today?
Sure.
I pulled this up. This is always my example. Y'all might be very familiar with this. This is the Pajamas project, which is under GitLab services. So actually I'll start with the Pajamas project's environments page. So this is running on a Kubernetes cluster. So it gives us the pods. You can like jump out. So you navigated to this by going to ops and then environments, shows the environments. It folded in all the review, which are like the ephemeral environments that are running for review apps here. And then, yeah, you can see how many pods are deployed for each environment, production and staging. And then you can like run certain deploy jobs if you want. Like, oh, there's a deploy job that you might want to regularly manually run. You can kind of store those here. There's some way to annotate that in your YAML. You can jump to the live reference URL. You can open the terminal for kubectl. You can also like redeploy the most recent stable branch commit or stop the environment entirely. But the interesting thing, especially when we're talking about group level environments, is that these are all under a GitLab services project that it only runs one Kubernetes cluster for all the services. Maybe I don't have access to the subgroups, but maybe they don't have them. But I think there are some other projects like license and customer dot that are in here that I just don't have access to. But this is the only way that you can see like, oh, this is one production cluster that's serving those multiple projects underneath. And all I get is this cluster saying service prod. And I can probably click into this and see some view of the different environments underneath, but it's, it's not the same view and I don't have the same capabilities because there is no construct for me here that's an environment at a group level.
Then potentially on top, problematic on top of what you just pointed out. If you're not running on Kubernetes, then you don't have this view at all.
Correct.
And therefore there's literally, well, not quite zero, but very difficult ways of tying different projects together. You could do it exactly through that environment's dashboard.
Correct.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
another
another
thing-
thing that we learned that people don't use this environment dashboard at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you any information. You cannot act on anything. And that was also part of our next big thing is to, instead of using this environment dashboard, make that, I think Daniel, is Daniel here, Daniel Fosco? Yeah, Daniel is, I saw you working on like a menu option, right? For where do we place the environments and this information without taking users from but taking it to this dashboard context.
So that environment's dashboard, I'm just going to verbalize what I think it does, is a user will have to manually add the projects that they're interested in seeing some sort of grouping together. So you can add any projects that you have access to. And these projects will show the environment that they have. And so if the projects are indeed related, you'll see that, oh yeah, these are all in production, but you have to manually work that out in your brain that they're connected in this way. But if they're completely disparate projects and they all are in production environments, these production environments are not the same environments. This dashboard doesn't tell you any of these details.
Right.
In this case, I would like to actually, environments are pretty tricky because like from an SRE perspective, for example, production could mean 3 different clusters in 3 geozones, and staging are another 3 clusters in a single geozone. While from the developer's point of view, production is actually the version of your app that was deployed into those 3 clusters. And to show this, that's actually, I think it's pretty complicated to figure out which is the right level of abstraction, right level of what do we call production in this regard.
Yeah, I agree. And Victor and I have talked about this in the past, but there's also this connection between, there are also now, as more people are adopting infrastructure as code, there's this connection between where the infrastructure for that environment is defined and where the application state for what applications are running in that are defined. And it's really hard to make a connection between those two. Think about if you were running a Kubernetes cluster that has 4 different services, they're all running in their own namespaces in production, but you kind of want to be able to quickly see as the operator, what version of those are running, what was the recent commit for each one of those. It's really hard to distill that down. And as a developer, you want to know what type of infrastructure is being run in order for me to make sure that, like, if I'm troubleshooting a code problem, I understand what the configuration of that infrastructure is. So there's this connection missing between where the infrastructure is defined, that is that environment, that Victor is talking about from an SRE perspective, and where the application code that's currently deployed is defined. And there's no easy way for me to connect the two of those.
And Nathan, maybe you remember some of the things that we were, I'm not sure if you worked on it with audits around sharing the environments across projects. I remember at least that we worked a few months ago on cleaning up that view or building that connection. Of course, not in the infrastructure sense, but improving what we have today for environments. Do you remember what we've done then, or if you?
Yeah, I think our initial idea was to create a group level environments page that would then group them based on either the URL or maybe we were thinking a separate grouping field we were going to add. Because our assumption was that if you have different environments that all point to the same URL, really those are all part of the same environment. So that's how we were going to group it just for an MVC. And that would at least give you that kind of group level grouping.
Yeah.
And do we have any So actually, this will be a question to you, Ryan. Like, do we have any research around what our users would expect in terms of grouping?
We do. So these are in the links that I added here to the agenda. And at least what we were going to do for the MVC was take care of only the special environment, which is production, so that they could have all these production environments within their projects, group, whatever, but an application. And then we would be able to link all of them to like an umbrella. So everything, for example, everything at GitLab, all production environments that we deploy for every sub-project within the group. And then for now, or at least that was a plan, give the ability, users the ability to see that, because they're only interested in what was the last thing that went into production, right? And everything else you could go into your project level and just dig for the information or the review, the testing, et cetera, et cetera. But that was a much bigger problem that we had to solve, and we didn't move that much further. But we had 3 teams. There was visibility into deployments and environments across projects that are shared within groups, projects, groups in different projects, administration of those, so managing permissions, variables, and everything. So for example, deploy freezes, you set once and then cascade to all projects in a group, rather than you have to do that manually every time. And also create context when a single environment is being used in different projects. That's also a use case. And we broke that into 3. We have issues with that. We have research, we have prototypes, we have issues. And I think with environments, I'm talking a lot because environments it's this construct, like Kenny said in the beginning, that is not just that one URL and that one thing that you see at the end. We have to put I think break the problem down, but also look into the existing research, because yeah, we talked to, I think, 40 something customers last year about this. And that's what the vision of release management was, part of the vision was related to.
So we seem to be talking about these environments as if they're like a set of shared resources between projects and groups. And the closest thing I can think of in GitLab for a shared resource that works really well today is actually the runners. And I wonder if approaching environments from a similar perspective might help us in a lot of these areas.
What do you mean?
Ooh, I like that. Sorry, go ahead, Victor.
So we have, and this kind of goes for the Kubernetes clusters as well, right? You can share a Kubernetes cluster from a group level or even like an instance-wide level. And the cluster itself kind of defines what the environment is. Not entirely or specifically, because I think a cluster can run several different kind of sets of environments at once. But we have these runners, and the runners can be tagged and organized and shared between groups. They don't have quite as much observability because they don't really need the same level of observability. But at the same time, you can, as a project, opt into using shared resources or shared runners across groups and shared runners across instances as well. So that kind of is my inspiration for looking at environments this way.
I'm just trying to understand. So you say something like that you would add a way to define environments at the instance or group level, and then the project just says that I'm using this environment, or because now it's the other way around, that you just define the project. That's what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Like the project could say, oh, deploy to an environment with similar to runner, like these tags, and then it finds the right environment to deploy to. The interesting thing to me is that unlike runners are like their own constructs, but I'm going to go back to environments are typically defined as a project. I mean, even our Kubernetes management is starting to say this is the Kubernetes cluster configuration project that you're going to use. So you could almost say, you don't have to create a new construct, you're just drawing a connection between 2 different projects. I don't know if we have, I guess, an example of how we like designate a project as a special project within a group, for example, is there's some like trickle down things. I'm trying to think, maybe insights is one of these, where in insights, when you want to create dashboards, if you want group level insights, you say which project is the designated group level insights, right? And that project then is the source for displaying the insights dashboards at a group level. You could think of a similar construct here, where you're like, you need to designate what's the group level, which projects are group level environments. That is where those environments are defined. And then you could tag them and say, every project can choose to deploy to one or the other.
I do kind of wonder if this use of special projects comes out of not having the viewpoints that we're trying to create. Like they're organically grown workarounds.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's like there is no
That's my
construct
impression as well.
for connections between projects that aren't group hierarchies, which is a
Mhm.
limitation we do work around a lot in our product. And it's created this funky experience to start with.
So
Okay.
one thing that's not clear for me in terms of group level environments is, let's say you have, in case like let's say we have this feature today, right? We have a group level environment called production. Does that mean that every project within that group deploys to that environment in terms of like, is this huge box and a bunch of different applications are deploying to that box, or it's something else?
Really liked what Andrew was saying, which is if you think of the runner construct, you can attach as many different runner types as you want to the group, and then the individual project is determining which, using tags, which runner do I want to run this job on. You could think of something similar at the group level for environments, where it's not every project has to deploy to this environment, but the projects choose.
I think the question is more tricky than that, because just what you mentioned as well, that it might be that at the group level, there is a production cluster defined. And actually, I want to deploy in a specific namespace of that cluster. Then do I target that environment that is the cluster? Or do I say that there is that my environment, my production is part of that environment? But to nevertheless give an answer to the question itself, I would say we would target that environment in a sense. Let it be some sub environments if ever it happens, or other ways, but it would target everybody who targets production, targets the group level production environment.
Right. One thing that I think I'm perhaps mixing up is that environments and deployment target are not necessarily the same thing, right? And you wrote about this in your glossary, Victor.
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure I'm less confused than before, but I'm definitely exposed to more information.
I will find the recording of Jackie going through all these different concepts, environments, deployment, and also the learnings from the environment service. And I actually found the opportunity canvas now. And it says here that she interviewed, I don't know how many people, but 60% of the SASHAs, software developers, found that environments are difficult to set up, non-compliant, and hard to use for advanced deployments. So that's why people are very unlikely to adopt it, since they want to control it. They want to just have that visibility without thinking too much about it. All these different things, setting up at the group level, project level, different names, tags, etc., etc. But yes, no, Daniel, it's more complicated than what it seems, and it's different things. Yeah.
I want to kind of pause here real quick to regurgitate everything that we talked about so far, which is what we have today is built on enabling the developer, or potentially a more akin to like an individual developer building and responsible for their project, and they can do all manners of things and they're in control. But this concept breaks down when it's more complicated. There's multiple teams of people involved, and it becomes challenging because like who's responsible for what is not really clear, and for And to Hayana's point, as the Sashas of the world, when they want to do things like deploying things, they're kind of blocked because they don't have, they're not clear of what this environment concept is. They didn't set it up. They don't know who's responsible for setting it up. And from that point, the concept as we have built today is no longer being used. At least that's how I grok what everyone's been saying.
So does this involve as well something like that? There would be that Sasha is not the right person to set up the environment, and then like our SREs, they don't mind speaking about Gprod and Gstaging. So they are, that's what you mean, that's why we are kind of mistargeted environments, because Sasha doesn't want to set up an environment while there would be other people like Devon who would be happy to play with that. That's what you meant, or something different? Because I'm not sure to understand.
Yeah, I think what we built is for Sasha, but Sasha doesn't work. When Sasha works in a team, she's not the right persona.
Yeah, they don't care about environments. That came out from my interviews as well. Like my favorite quote around these lines is that the engineers come to us to, I spoke with the platform engineer, that the engineers come to us to ask questions about the infrastructure they deploy to only when there's an error.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't even know about it.
Cool. Kenny, you were gonna,
yeah,
go ahead.
I actually wanted to go back to something Hayana said, which was when the research was pointing to like some confusion on setup, but then also a compliance concern. And Shinya, I don't want to call on you, and your video is not on, so maybe that I shouldn't. But I know I referenced Shinya's like deployment safety documentation a lot. And I don't know if Shinya, if you have a perspective on, or we know what those limitations are, those kind of like compliance limitations that were prohibiting people from using environments, because that feels like an important thing to drill into. Maybe Shinya was just listening in for a little while. Hayan, did you know?
Sorry, I was reading the opportunity canvas. Can you repeat the question?
The question was about what were the compliance implications? Because I know we talk and document a lot about deployment safety and how to make sure you have like appropriate segregation of duties between those who set up and manage the environments and those who deploy to them. But I don't know if that feels like something that we can't just say, oh, well, if we fix the ease of understanding the construct and setting it up, that they'll use it if there's a big compliance blocker from using it in the first place.
Thinking. Because another thing that we learn is that people are using also other tools today to manage their deployments in their environments. But when it comes to compliance, that's a very good question, Kenny. I'll have to circle back on that.
So what I've heard from customers, like at the top level, is if there's an audit, they want to be able to say definitively what is in an environment. So the concept of like going to an environment and seeing what's deployed and the history of that deployment is somewhat useful, but deployment is also potentially like a step removed from having that clear audit trail. And we also have this concept of a release, which is a tagged set of artifacts. Like if the auditor can see what's everything that's tagged, all the artifacts that's there, and we have confidence that's what's deployed, then that is very useful for fulfilling that job.
And I would posit that we have a path for solving that job, to like, let me get the artifacts for a tagged release. The one that I seem to always hear, and I remember Ori working pretty heavily on this, was I'm going to allow my developers to continually deploy, but there needs to be some kind of like safety controls for approval of that deployment, or who can adjust, who can view environment variables, those kinds of things. It was more around maybe I think compliance is the right word, but the kind of, in my compliance framework, I have to have these separation of duties between who can do what in order to make sure that, you know, production changes can't make it without two sets of eyes or specific personnel looking at reviewing it.
The more we talk, the more I think Jackie should be here because she's the one that did all this research and she has all these insights in her head, and also about how we're planning on breaking down in themes, right? Because now you're talking about compliance and I'm like, yes. We talked about audit, we talked about, but it's so much information. And I think it would be nice to have a sync or have a moment with her where she could explain what was her vision for environments, for deployments when we were working with the release management team. Because it's a lot and it overlaps with everything within CI/CD, but we just don't see it today. So yeah. Anyway.
So I think our segregation of duties feature are not well implemented. Like we have a bunch of group level or project level protect the environments or protect something. But basically what's missing is RBAC solution, role-based access control, something like AWS has. Actually, there's an issue somewhere. I already saw that. Like person A can access to like environment A and runner A. He can access to this variable, but that variable. This type of granular control is missing. And then, you know, GitLab has 5 roles: maintainer, developer, maintainer, developer, reporter, guests, right? And these 4 roles are not enough to, you know, clearly define the segregation of duties. So where is the operator role here? Where is there like developer? Maybe developers is already existing, but what is maintainer? Is it operator or developer? Yeah, we like, if you want to build a really solid, robust permission access control, then like RBAC access is a way to go, but this certainly requires tons of efforts. Yes.
So I was searching for the mute button. The one thing I do want to say, and I just took a little action item for myself, we should be willing to break through barriers to make sure that we have the appropriate roles. I know in the past we've said like, oh, well, we shouldn't create new roles because we don't want to add more roles, or we shouldn't create new roles because we're waiting for another group to add this RBAC solution. I've been one of the ones who said that, to be clear. I think you know, if that's a big pain point for our ability to make environments in these stages successful, yeah, we should go back. We should revisit that and move past it if need be, because we shouldn't feel limited by some other group or some artificial construct that said no more new roles.
I feel like we are really starting to talk about what are the jobs that we want to do around the concept of environment. So there is certainly segregation of duty or access control. Can we talk more about what other jobs environments can enable?
Well, I think, yeah, from the like Sasha developer perspective, there's what Victor was saying. I want to know that my application will go to a production environment, and I don't really want to think about what that environment is or how it happens. I just want to know that I have easy ability to create code, know that that passed appropriate tests, and when merged gets to production, however that process might be. But I think the thing we're suggesting is that there's a different persona, which is who's the person who operates that environment. Is that Devin or Priyanka? And are those, their workflows are different. They need to like set up and enable developers to easily do what we want Sasha to be able to do. And they need to be able to have insights about what projects are deploying to that environment and troubleshoot when there are environment issues that arise.
Yeah, it might be exactly the same thing that Kenny said, but I'm not 100% sure. Which I like to phrase one of the jobs is that I want to be able to promote a given release between environments in various ways, to be very specific about a job. So that's when first it goes automatically to development environment, but to get to production, it's not automatic, because then I need some more eyeballs to have a look at my environment, that release.
And that job is
So-
kind of like managing application changes, like promoting is probably best. Promoting application changes between environments. So yeah, it's important to remember that it's not just merge goes to production in hardly any cases.
And I think that this promotion is the core of this job, that it's not a new release. The release was built already, but there are conditions to that and so on. So that's why it's a tricky one. Another one that came back from Marshall from NASA is that it's really related to compliance, and probably there are many jobs related to compliance, but he would like to be able to query the release artifacts in each of the environments. And this is something that some recent US requirements even prescribe to them to be able to compliant.
Gonna throw a left field idea out there. What about things like data deletion? Is this related? Can we solve that from an environment perspective? So we have all these laws now that says if someone requests their data to be deleted, that needs to be done. And for most companies, this is really hard because it becomes a manual process. Is environment a central place where that could be the starting point?
I don't think so, because that's more of a storage and data problem. That's really environment specific. I mean, all the personal data should be in one of the production environments and nowhere else.
Going back to the idea of permissions, so secrets is a related thing to permissions. How do you access those? And then related to secrets are various variables you might want to share across groups and projects in the environment.
Definitely.
What other ideas or jobs do we think we can solve around the concept of environment?
I think SLIs and SLOs are a topic here as well, which might be related to what you said first around, I want to see what I have in a specific environment, but it's more than that, because I want to see the status of that deployment in that environment. Which means in this level, it just means monitoring, but a different use case would be to troubleshoot an environment.
What do you mean by troubleshoot, Victor?
I mean that I see that new release went out. I would say probably incident management. Yeah. So that's how we call it at GitLab. That there's an incident. An incident is tied to an environment. I can hardly think about incidents without speaking about environments. And I have to handle that case. That's what I meant.
Yeah, on top of that, I think there's some overlap with observability in the sense of the environment is broken. Is it the infrastructure that's broken or my application code, right? Being able to have visibility on that. Like,
Yeah.
especially as a developer, like I want to know if my code is breaking the application or if it's something that's outside of my control.
Exactly, and that's the environment dashboard, right? That's where it's supposed to go. And how is my my application doing? Not just in sense of adding projects, but the status of the deployment, for example, over time. And I'm going to highlight here for you, Daniel. You know, version of deployments and getting this type of data rather than just a list in a different format of what you can do. But those are the things that we did not validate. We knew that we had to provide those insights to users. Also rollbacks, but yeah, we didn't go that further down in that sense.
It's a bit far-fetched, but continuing on Kevin's idea around user data, I could imagine that environments are related to product metrics. And by product metrics, I really mean not the ops metrics, but usage data within the product. Because if I think about a feature in a sense that we build this in order to move the needle here, and then we deploy that feature to production, then I would like to see the needle in the production environment moving.
Yeah, I love that. I do think if you take that to just what's the kind of like end construct for value stream management, it is a production environment, and the kind of collection of applications, however many there are that make up that singular production environment, is typically the thing that is what you would measure value from. Like that's where the number of users that you might be counting. And so you might be working on a service that, you know, does some type of shopping cart transaction, but you have a whole broad application and you're looking for the business metric at the environment level, even though you're making code changes and deploying the code for just the transaction portion. That's a really good point. And it does speak to, like, production is where you complete the feedback loop, right? So if you, that construct, that environment construct is critical to being able to actually measure the completion of that loop.
What about things like cost for environment? If we know all the projects, all the deployments, all the infrastructure that that environment has, could we eventually be able to do something like, we'll figure out how much this thing costs to run?
Definitely complex.
Definitely.
Although I will say, if you think about what we were talking about earlier, that infrastructure, if it's defined as code somewhere as a separate entity already, you could do that without even having any knowledge of what applications were getting deployed there, because you would have some, just knowing the infrastructure and the definition of that environment, you could probably get to most of the way there.
I mean, you could probably do estimates for sure, but let's just say the customer is deploying to AWS. You could definitely do an estimate, but then if it's a large organization on AWS, they have their own agreements. And so typically you have to do this sort of like cross-referencing. So you could probably do like a really light MVC and then say, hey, the estimated cost is X, but translation might be harder in terms of the actual cost.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to speak about the actual cost as well outside of the estimates, because infrastructure as code really just gives you estimates. But even in cases where you have, like, even in minor case, like if somebody uses Google GK Autopilot, that you won't know how much resources you consume in advance, because it's autopilot, so it will scale as needed. It depends on the number of pods that you run. So it has a very different model for that.
Kevin, we are at time. Is there anything that you would like to follow up with?
Yeah,
Conversation?
I'm definitely going to rewatch this video because we discussed a lot of things, and clearly there's a follow-up I'll take with Jackie to get her brain dump. And I believe we have a lot of these things written down in issues and so forth already. So there is work to be done around organization, and there, as I cross-reference these things together, and there are things that we haven't captured, I'll attempt to capture them over the next couple of weeks. But this is, I believe this is going to be a longer term work item that we continue to iterate over. So this is just the beginning. We'll have many more discussions on this topic. Thank you everyone for your contribution. Really appreciate y'all joining the call and participating. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.